Greetings, travelers, and welcome to Hell. I'll be your guide this lovely evening. Hello, welcome in everyone, hello. Let us start with our first fact. Snails can impregnate themselves as a last resort, and there went the monetization. No, seriously, let me explain this, okay? So, you know how snails are hermaphrodites, which means that they're both, each one of them, is both a male and a female. This means that when they reproduce with each other, they will both give the sperm as well as also receive it. So both snails come out pregnant, essentially. But this also means that in a last case scenario where it can't find anyone else to do it with, a snail, it can do it with itself and get itself pregnant by depositing its own sperm into its own eggs. What you're gonna get out of it is essentially a clone. It's basically cloning, I suppose. Although it's not exactly gonna be the same, but you're gonna end with the clone. I'm not sure if it's I don't think it's gonna be a 100% genetic match. So it's not like 100% incest, but it's pretty darn close to it. So the thing is, no, actually, I guess it is 100% incest. So the reason why I think you can get something which is not exactly a genetic match is because during the process of giving the genes to the baby, giving the genes to the egg and the sperm, you don't just grab like one chromosome of each pair. What happens is that there's actually a mixture between the gene, like the chromosomes will sort of exchange genes with their counterparts, not with unrelated ones, so like chromosome number 4 and so like the X and Y. No, I guess the X and Y will exchange some information, but you won't have like the X chromosome and then like the first chromosome exchanging. And it's like it's only chromosomes with their counterparts because they come in pairs. They will sort of switch some sections. Because you have the switch, even if like the same individual impregnate themselves, you can end up with slight variation where, for example, you get both pairs have the same section, whereas in the parent there would be two different sections because the section just got copied in the part that became either the egg or the sperm. So it's not 100% a clone, but it's pretty gosh darn close to one. It's pretty gosh darn close to being a clone. And this is horrible. This is horrible. It means that there's no genetic diversity. So if the first individual happened to be weak to a particular type of disease, then so would all of his children's. That's like the whole reason of having sexual reproduction and all of that is so that you can have genetic diversity, so that you wouldn't have all of your population just decimated by like one disease or like one predator, essentially. So this is very counterproductive, which is why it's only as a last resort. By the way, humans can't do that. There's actually a system in place which would have prevented you. Humans could not get themselves pregnant. There's a genetic lock that would just straight up prevent an embryo from developing. It only exists in mammals, though. Snails are not mammals, which is why they can impregnate themselves. This was very bizarre to learn. I mean, I assume that thing has a purpose other than making sure that mammals don't get themselves pregnant, but one of the side effects of that mechanism is that mammals can in fact not get themselves pregnant. Specifically, with genes, some of them can be turned on or off, or like suppressed or enhanced or whatever. So depending on if you got the gene from your father or mother, some of the sections will get turned off or on. If you get them both from the same individual, then you might end up with a scenario where you wouldn't have the right genes turned on. So like both sets would have the same genes turned on when there should be a difference, when like one set should have these genes and the other set should have other genes turned on. So you won't have the right genes, and so you won't be able to have a baby. Though honestly, I don't know how a true hermaphrodite human would work. Maybe with a true hermaphrodite they can activate both the sperm will have the some genes activated, the ones that relate to like the guy genes, and then the eggs would be activated as if they came from like a normal female. I don't know, man. Sex is weird. Sexy nature is freaking weird. This is the first fact, okay? It was crazy as hell. Anyway, let's talk about the next fact. Aphids eat sap and then excrete out the excess sugar as honeydew. Yay! Okay, let's talk about this. So trees, trees, you love them, except for me, I hate trees. So they have sap, which is basically the sugar that is made at the leaves that goes down to the rest of the tree, because the tree has to eat something, otherwise it will die, and it doesn't want to die, unfortunately. Sap is basically a concentration of, it's not only made of sugar, but it's mostly made of sugar. It's mostly made of like sugar and water, and it has some protein, some vitamins, also some like antibacterial stuff to prevent because otherwise microbes would just be all over that, just living there. So it's mainly sugar, and this is a problem if you're, say, an insect that only eats sap, like aphid. This is a problem because you don't need that much sugar. You need proteins, you need vitamins, you need other stuff as well. Which means that if you want to get your protein intake, then you're going to have to eat a lot of sap. See, unfortunately, aphids are not sophisticated enough to have things like protein powder. So instead, they just eat a ton of sap and then just excrete out all the excess sugar. They make this like orange liquid that's called honeydew, and it is basically concentrated sugar. So it's extremely sweet. It's extremely sweet with a lot of calories and a lot of things like to eat these honeydews. For example, ants. Ant colonies will keep aphid farms specifically so that they can eat their poop, which is sugar. They will like come to them with their antennas and pet them, and then the petting would cause the aphid to poop out, and then the ant would eat it. Yay! I love biology. So you know what they say. One insect poop is another insect's treasure. I hate. Let's go to the next fact. Birds can be male on one half and female on the other half, and not just on the outside. Okay, so this is one of those things that really throw you for a loop. If you look at this picture right here, you'll see that we have a bird that is male on one half and female on the other half. You can tell because this particular type of bird has plumage coloration that is dependent on their sex. And you can see how one side of them is one color and the other one is another color. Now, you might be thinking, what if they just have a genetic kink that like gives them different colors? No, they checked it. They just straight up are like female on one side and male on the other. And this means that they have, on one side, they have a functioning ovary, and then on the other side, they have a functioning testes. They are, in fact, hermaphrodite. Can they get themselves pregnant? I don't know, man. Don't ask me these kind of questions ever again, please. Thank you. The thing is, when you have too much incest, the embryo can't develop properly because it's gonna have a ton of diseases. Now, it's fine with simpler things, because with simpler animals, there's less things that can go wrong, like snails. But birds are pretty gosh darn complicated, and that means a lot of things can go wrong. Okay, but seriously, let's talk about how the picket can happen, because like that's weird. That's really weird that one side is male and the other side is female. So how does that happen? Well, we don't really know, but we have guesses. We don't really know because it's such a rare thing to happen that it's just very weird. And it doesn't just happen in birds. It can happen, for example, in spiders. It can happen in insects. I don't think it can happen in mammals. I don't know of any case of mammals where it happens, but it can in fact happen in other cases as well. And the really unique thing about it is how clear of a split it is, because you can have a chimera. You can have a chimera where some of the cell lines are male and some of the cell lines are female. If you have, for example, like a vanishing twin, or not a twin, like a vanishing sibling, where you have two embryos in the womb, and then one of them just absorbs the other one and just keeps the cells alive. So, and then you get a chimera that has two types of cells in from two different genes. So one of them can be male and the other one can be female. But what's really special about here is that you can see how it's literally cut in half. There isn't just like a clump of female cells in a male body. It's literally split in half. So the reason why researchers think it happens, essentially what's happening is that you get two cells, one of them male and the other one female, and then they they clump together very, very, very early on. Like, before even the first division. They clump together, and then that way they grow, and then they both grow. They both grow, so they each become one half. You get two fertilized eggs, pretty much. But the question is, okay, well, how do you get two fertilized eggs that have different genders and they don't just like kill each other? Because this is unusual. If you have to, your body is very good at telling when something inside of you is not part of it, which is why chimeras are very rare. Because if you have different types of cells in your body would usually detect it and then destroy them. So how do you have like half and half? Well, it's because these cells are very similar to each other. So much so that they share the same sperm. From what I've managed to gather, it seems that the idea is that when an egg becomes ready to be fertilized by a sperm, so you have like an egg, and it gets ready to be fertilized by the sperm, you also have there's a part of the egg that breaks off and becomes what's called a polar body. So there's like an extra piece of it, essentially. And the thing about birds is that unlike humans, where the father determines the gene, because the sperm can either have, because the mother will always have the mother will always give the X chromosome, but then the father can give either an X or a Y. When I say mother and father, it's very confusing when I write it like this, because it looks like male and female. So in humans, the male can give either an X or Y chromosome, while the female can give just an X chromosome. But in birds, it doesn't work that way. In birds, it's the other way around. It's actually the mother that decides if it gets a W or a Z, while the father always give it, I think it's W. And then if you have like two W, then, I don't know, I think it's female. If you have, no, I think it's male if it has, it's male if it has two W's, and it's female if it has a W and a Z. What can happen is that this egg has the Z, and when this polar body has the opposite, so it would have like the W. And that is because both the polar body and the egg came from one cell that basically had a complete genome, and then it abandoned one half of the genome so that it could be fertilized. So you end up with essentially both of them having different genders. So you get the sperm, and the sperm has the W, and I think it's supposed to fertilize them both. Not exactly sure how that happens, but it somehow fertilizes them both. So you get the polar body turns into a WW, while the egg gets turned into WZ, which is the female. That's how you get one half male and one half female, and you can't even see part of the board. There we go. So that's how it works, pretty much. Very, very simple. Very simple. It all boils down to just the egg gets split in half so that it would only have one gene, and then one of the half is male and the other half is female, and then somehow they both get fertilized, and then usually this thing just gets thrown away and nothing is done with it. But in some very, very rare cases, it can actually get fertilized and becomes like its own cell. And then they can both mix together. They can both mix together to form one clump, and then they both grow. So they each go on one side. And that's how you get a bear that is one half male and one half female. Okay, so let's talk about the next fact. Identical twins can very rarely have different genders. And then the female is usually infertile. Let me explain. So, you know how identical twins work. It's two siblings, they have the same DNA, so that's why they're identical. You know, you get like one egg, one sperm, it gets fertilized, and then the egg splits, and then you get two cells, and then they split off, and they each go do their own thing. And then each of them becomes an embryo. And this is how you get twins that are identical. But then, if they have the same DNA, how can they have different genders? Another fun fact, which I've learned in my research of, can a human get themselves pregnant? If identical twins but different genders, how to know if regular twins are identical? Well, DNA testing. DNA testing, I suppose. But you would also see it. You would also see it in how they would be extremely similar to each other. Like same height, same build. Well, maybe not if they're different genders. So you're telling me identical twins are identical? Yeah. Never could have guessed that from the name. Never could have guessed that. I know, it's crazy. So, how do identical twins with the same DNA end up having different genders? That literally like it's in the name, identical. How can I have different genders? So you can have something very funny, I suppose. Something very, very weird can happen, where you start with an XY in the initial fertilized egg, and then what's gonna happen is that it splits, so you get one part which is XY, and then another one which is just the X. Another part can somehow lose the Y part, and it ends up becoming just an X. So you get one part XY, one part X. The XY will turn usually a guy because there's the Y chromosome, while the X part, which doesn't have the Y chromosome, will end up becoming a female. Now there is just one problem with this. There is a reason why you have two sets of chromosomes, for the same reason that incest is bad. If you only have one set, it means that any defect in this X chromosome are not gonna have any good version to replace them. Usually, if you have like two X's, then even if there's a problem with one of the X's, you're probably gonna have a dominant, better version in the other X. But if you only have one X, then you don't get that. And sure, guys only have a Y, they don't have an X, but there is still a lot of overlap. There's still a lot of overlap between X and Y, because Y is a degraded X chromosome, basically. It used to be a bigger X chromosome, and then some parts of it were stripped away. And then some unnecessary parts just got stripped away. So what you end up with is that the male is gonna be fine, but the female is gonna basically have the same effect as if their parents were cousins, and they're gonna suffer from incest. It's called, in this particular case, it's called Turner syndrome, and it has a bunch of nasty side effects, one of which is infertility. But biologically, they would in fact be a female, 100%. They don't have the Y chromosome, so they cannot develop to be a guy. They would continue on the developmental pathway of being a female and just grow up to be like, I want to say normal female. No, they would have some health complications, but for all intents and purposes, they're a female. Now, I would like to point out that this thing is extremely rare. Identical twins are already rare enough. But having this particular problem where you both have an identical twin and one of them loses the Y part, and there are no major enough issues that like the embryo can develop properly and doesn't just die during the developmental process in the womb. All of these factors make it an extremely rare event to happen, but it can in fact happen. The next time you see a fictional depiction of two identical twins of different genders, now you know that if the girl has any children, then they're adopted. Alright, next fact. Chickens with a damaged ovary can partially transition to become roosters. This is true. The specific thing that happens here is that chickens, as well as a lot of birds, as it turns out, only have one functioning ovary. They're kind of born with two of them, but only one of them is functional, and the other one is what's known as an ovotestis. It has both cells from what would normally be a testis, as well as what would normally be an ovary. So it's kind of like a mix of two things. Now, usually the ovary is gonna become functional, and then it's gonna produce like estrogen, or whatever the hell is the estrogen equivalent in chickens. And then the estrogen is gonna suppress the ovotestis. So it suppresses it and it basically does nothing. However, if the ovary gets damaged in a very particular way, where it stops making the estrogen, but the ovotestis is fine, and I don't know, there may be other conditions where there may be other mechanisms in the chicken that have to go wrong, but that doesn't matter. We just know that some conditions can go wrong in a way where the ovotestis would activate, would start functioning, and then it would start making testosterone. And the chicken would basically start to HRT itself. Basically give itself HRT. And start transitioning to become a rooster. They just have an organ inside of them that can give them HRT. That's wow. This fact kind of reminds me of the clownfish fact, how they can become from male to female. It's kind of similar anyway. The thing with fish also kind of have this thing where you would have like the dominant female. They would spread around pheromones that would like signal the other fish's bodies to suppress their female thingy. Like that's in the cases of those fish, I think the default state is to become a female. It ends up getting suppressed, so they become a male. The difference is though that the fish can fully transition, so they can fully go from making sperm to making eggs, or the other way around. The chickens can't. They can't reach a state where they're making sperm, but they can get pretty gosh darn close to it. Anyway, let's go to the next fact. You can have a functioning X, 2X, XY, or 3X human, but never a single Y or a double Y. So this fact is not that complicated actually, and I do not believe it is that weird either. So you know XX, you know XY, you know them, you love them, you get males, you get females. In most cases, it doesn't always happen. I don't think you can have an XX guy, but you can have an XY female because the Y chromosome is supposed to like a certain gene in it activates and it like signals the body, hey, starts becoming a dude, and this mechanism can actually fail. So you can have the genes to become a guy, they just don't get turned on properly. So you end up with an XY female, which is something that has happened and we have documented cases of it. These women who are 100% biological women, they can give birth, they can give birth, they have the female reproductive organs, but also they tend to have a lot of testosterone in their body, so they tend to like be bigger and more muscular, and it's like their bodies are kind of similar to guys with how their muscles are built. It's a very fascinating phenomenon. There is very important information in the X chromosome, which is not present in the Y chromosome. Now, the Y chromosome was probably once upon a time a version of the X, a version that was very similar to the X chromosome, but then it got degraded over time and lost a bunch of its genes. But even still nowadays, it still retains a lot of important genes, like how to become a guy, but also it retains important copies of gene from the X chromosome that you want to have a backup for. Because of the same reason that we talked about earlier with why incest is bad. Because if you only have one version, then that version might be corrupted and then you get fucked. So that's why you want to have a backup. The Y chromosome has some backup for genes, but not all of them. Because it's substantially smaller than the X chromosome, there's just not enough, there's just a lot of genes that are missing from it. This means that if you don't have an X chromosome, you cannot even develop into a proper embryo, let alone get born and live a normal life. This means that while you can have a human with only one X, or 2X or 2X or an XY or even 3XS, which, by the way, 3XS is not a bad thing. Nothing would happen. You don't get like any disease out of it. You just get another backup for your backup. Like you still have like the functioning proper genes, so you're Gucci. You cannot have a human with just a Y chromosome or like two Y chromosomes. You cannot have that. If you don't have the X chromosome, then it's just not gonna develop. It's just not even gonna become an embryo. One X chromosome is bad though. Again, you don't have a backup. 3Xs, you have two backups. Great, fantastic. Might even spare you from a disease. Not likely, because you get the only way that you can have 3Xs, either one of the chromosome gets duplicated, or the egg, or like the egg or the sperm already comes pre-installed with like 2Xs. Which is fine. It can happen. Weird stuff happens. Like it's not an exact science. It's not really an exact science. Like all kind of weird stuff happens with cells. Like they're not perfect. Okay, so moving on to our next fact. Many lizard species have a third eye on the top of their heads that can detect light and shadows. This is true. I mean, all of them are. See, it's not so much as an eye as like a very very primitive form of an eye, where it's basically a bunch of photosensitive receptors. The idea is that lizards are cold-blooded, so they need to regulate their own temperatures. This means that they have to sometimes stand in the sun or in the shadows or in like a cold and already cold place so that they could cool down or heat up properly. This means that they would very much like to know, am I standing in the shadows or am I standing in the sun? Some of them will have sort of a third eye on the top of their head that lets them know, hey, you're in the shadows. Hey, there's not a lot of light coming from top of you. You're in the shadows. This can also be used against predators, because say something puts like a head or a hand above the lizard can detect it. The lizard can detect that there's something above it because it was 1 minute basking in the sun and then the next it's suddenly in the shadow. It's not a proper eye though. Having a third eye is... We're gonna talk more about this in the second segment of this episode, but usually very big changes, like having an extra set of, like an extra eye, like a fully formed, very similar to the two eyes at the side of the head's eyes, comes, while it can potentially happens, comes with a lot of downsides that make it very, very unlikely to occur. I don't know what to say, like that's, they have an eye being used to detect light and shadows, they use it to regulate the temperature, very useful. I would also like to have eyes on the back of my head. I feel like they would be very useful. Very, very cool. They've got the mind, they've opened their chakras and their mind's eye. Won't you need to be bolder for your eyes to be able to see from there? I can cut like circles. There could be like circles cut in the cut in the hair. Yeah, that is all the facts I have for you today in terms of the fun fact compilation.